Hello, my name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. My guest today is Melanie Franklin, CEO of Capability for Change, which is an online platform for developing practical skills and capabilities for achieving organisational change and transformations. Melanie is acknowledged as a thought leader in transformational change through academic research and practical consulting for global organisations as diverse as the United Nations, utility and telecoms, global consultancies, universities, health services and central government functions in the US, Europe and the Middle East. Mel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, me too. We've had a few conversations. I think we met face-to-face for the first time at the Change Awards earlier on this year. But actually, I'd been circling around each other on LinkedIn for a while.
I'm really pleased to be a judge for the Change Awards. We met at the actual presentation evening. And in fact, the Change Awards for 2023-24 are launching in just a few weeks. So I'm looking forward to anybody and everybody who's got an achievement they want to shout about to fill in a very simple application. And it's worth it because you can say, hey, I've applied for one of the Change Awards, and all of our winners. It was a brilliant night, wasn't it?
It was amazing. And thank you for sharing that with people, because there'll be lots of change people listening. I have to say, it was one of the best nights I've had in such a long time. And it was so lovely to be amongst people who understood what I do for a living. I don't know whether you felt the same. I've had so many conversations, particularly with Ket Patel, who I know you know. And when he came on this podcast, we were saying how hard it is sometimes to explain to people what we do. And it was great to just be with people who you didn't have to explain what a change professional actually does.
I'm writing a paper at the moment. I'm delivering another session for a global defence manufacturer this time about what is change management and what is the value of change management. And it horrifies me the number of times I have to keep repeating that session. So I definitely felt like you. I was amongst my own tribe because we all understood each other, and we just kept going, even when there were some interruptions from, I think there was a problem with some of the sound, and we all just thought we'll flex around this and we'll keep going. And people did say, yeah, that's what change people do. So I felt I was amongst my own tribe, but I was at the front with all the other judges, and I was next to one of the judges where every sort of 2/3 of the award winners, I trained them. And he said in the end, shut up. And then he went, oh, you trained me. I went, yeah. I've been doing it that long.
Take some of the credit for their success.
No, all down to them. It's how they apply the knowledge. And I really enjoy seeing the successes that people are having, as you say, in an environment where people don't always understand. So what is change management? Is that a bit of telling people about a change? And you think, oh, we've got a long way to go.
Or managing projects. That's the other one. Is it managing a project? Well, yeah. Sometimes, but there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. And I think as I continually develop and the latest trends in change management, I'm always sort of moving things forward. And I think that trying to get across to people that it's about, ultimately, we are marketeers. We have to get people passionately involved in change. Change only happens when people decide. They have that moment where they go, well, okay, I'll give it a go, whether it's a new system or it's following a new process. And we've all experienced changes where we get on and we make a change. And then I'm thinking about things where this year, as we're coming towards the year end now, I'm thinking, which changes didn't land in my own company? One of them is actually time recording. And I look at how that was managed by somebody who's no longer with the company. And she basically just sent out the link and said, here, use this system. And I'm going, but it's a behavior change. You're asking people to adopt a whole new habit. Get them talking about when are they going to record their time? How are they going to keep note of it? Are they going to do this on a weekly Friday afternoon type thing, or is it a first thing in the morning task for them? Get people talking about when they're going to behave the way you want them to behave. And that's part of the battle. You have to get people aware that actually we really mean it. We're not just sort of saying, hey, we want you to do this. No, we really mean it. These are the reasons why. And splitting those two things up, because making people aware that we are going to do something different and actually then selling the benefits to them. Don't confuse the two messages. People aren't ready to hear about the good stuff if they don't even know that it's real. And then you have to keep persuading them, as well as introducing them to little opportunities to have a practice, have a go, and make it real. So we know that throughout sort of the life of any change, there's an awful lot of influencing and persuading. And I think in the last couple of years, I've noticed how I've certainly moved a lot more into using neuroscience to help me be far more targeted, far more surgical almost in my approach to my stakeholders. Telling a good story doesn't cut it anymore. I think I need to get into the brain of somebody, and I need to speak in brain-friendly speak. I think that's why I'm in the middle of launching the Neuroscience for Change new global certification, and the book will be published next year. And I look at my schedule and think, well, what are you doing, Melanie? But I do believe in it. I've been using neuroscience to improve my communication of why people should change over the last few years. And I think we as a profession are moving into a more professional approach, less accidental. I don't want to use the word amateurish, because I absolutely don't think that's what we are. But I think sometimes we don't have a clear toolkit of how we do things. And that goes back to our original argument. It's harder to get the respect of those who don't understand what we do if we can't say, well, we do it this way and this is our toolkit. And this. So I think there's something in there around how we're sharpening up how we do things.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that is the bit that's missing for me a lot in organizations when they're trying to change, is that the link between sharing information about what's happening, persuading people that this is all a good idea, but then also helping people understand what this world in the future is going to look like. And I think that's the bit that's missing, that there's often a lot of advocacy for change, like trying to tell people this is a really good idea, but without all the other stuff around it, so that people aren't convinced. It's not, as you say, it's not playing into the story, it's not playing into the neuroscience, it's not playing into the way that we make decisions and the way that we choose to do things. So it then becomes like pushing a rock up a hill, because you're trying to persuade everybody that this is a really good idea without doing some of the other work around communicating in a way that actually appeals to people and they can imagine what this new world's going to look like. I'm doing a technology implementation at the moment with a client, and it's what we're trying to do is exactly that, trying to show people what it's going to be like. And when you come in the morning, what is your desktop going to look like, and what's the first thing that you're going to do look like, and how's your day going to shape up, and all that sort of thing, because that's what helps people get with the program, isn't it?
It is. And I think there is a skill, an absolute skill in imagining the future. And I certainly work with senior leaders who they commission, for example, a new technology platform, but can't really describe what it is that they've commissioned. And so they aren't able to give that real world vision out to people who they're asking to get on board with it. I do think we need to spend quite a lot of time doing that imagining. I ran a session this morning where we were asking lots of questions about, well, what does the end goal look like? What are we heading towards? And let's put some layer of detail around that. And then let's put some more detail around that. So as you say, people can imagine when they first arrive at work or they first open their laptop on their kitchen table, what's expected of them. Perhaps I'm doing one which involves a new production line and a new distribution centre. So actually showing people pictures of, no, there won't be any forklift trucks. actually the trucks will actually back onto here, everything's rolled into the centre and it goes off here and here, and actually trying to give them a feeling of those things won't be there and these things will be. So I think it's how do you bring it to life?
Exactly.
Really get people on board.
One of my clients did, they created a whole series of cartoons to show what people's day would be like in this new world. It was kind of post-COVID. They were changing the way that they operated and going from a very, 9 to 5 in the office organization to work based on where you need to work and dress for your day. That's their new policy, which I love. They created cartoons with real people in the organization, showing them wandering around, these little avatars doing their thing, and it went down brilliantly well because it was funny and it didn't take itself too seriously, but it explained what the life at work was going to be like.
Bringing things to life is not necessarily a skill of those subject matter experts that are great at processing work. So I find in a lot of my work, I am liaising with graphic designers, I'm liaising with video content producers, I'm thinking about how do we build in some editing time for video, how can we communicate better? So I think always, in this incredibly crowded marketplace where everybody's got more change than they can possibly cope with, then how do we communicate it better? And I think it's remembering that we're in an incredibly crowded marketplace, and that we have to win an argument when people actually, it's not that they aren't really that interested, it's just they simply don't have the time. And I think I run the Global Capability for Change survey every year. And the theme that comes out all the time is we don't have enough time to manage these changes. We don't have enough time to implement them. People don't feel that they have enough time to take part. So I think, and that timing issue seems to be getting worse and worse. And my Capability for Change survey, which goes out to sort of global heads of change management practice all around the world, anyone who's sort of involved in building the capability for change in their organization takes part. And we're not the only survey that's done this. Gartner has done some work in this. Gallup has done some work. And a few of the other big consultancies are looking at, what are the key themes in change? And timing keeps coming back. Overload is, I think, the biggest threat to us being successful.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I mean, before we came on the call, you were talking about the day that you've had before we've even spoken of multiple meetings and calls. I think almost everyone's diary is like that now. So there is no headspace for thinking and for dealing with these things. Before we move on, I'm glad you mentioned your survey, because actually when this podcast comes out, it will probably be about the same time as your 2023 survey goes live. So we will put a link in the show notes so that people can have a look and sign up. What's the purpose of the survey? Why did you set it up?
The reason I set it up is because, like you, like everybody on this podcast, I am often in senior level meetings where I'm having to evidence what are we talking about with change management. And I can tell a good story about explaining what it is I do and the value that I offer. But I know that an evidence-based led argument that says, did you know that 40% of other organizations in our industry or other organizations in this country are doing this better than we are, or are doing it worse than we are? I just wanted to have I wanted to be able to quote statistics. I think in change, I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I know that we are very, very good at communicating with words and with visuals, but we're not always as data-led as we could be. And so I decided, out of my own pocket, to be honest, to pay for a global annual survey so that I would have the statistics I need. But I also know that everybody on this call can use exactly the same statistics. So when people have completed the survey, they get their own responses back. They get a report which highlights from me all of the statistics and gives them a comparison. And I actually write a long story pointing out key things that I've noticed by trawling all the way through the data. And I invite people to a webinar where also we present that. And that webinar is something that they can invite their senior leaders to as well. In fact, last year when we did the survey, we had a number of clients come back and say, can we actually run this in-house? Because we think that we would get a range of responses from people who are line managers trying to cope with change, are change and project professionals whose job it is to make change happen. We think there's probably going to be a big difference. They were all right, by the way. They wanted to highlight that, and they wanted their own statistics, and then they could compare that more than just sort of one or two responses from people in their company. But I thought that was really interesting. But that's why I did it. I did it because I really want to be more evidence-based, because I think that's part of our professionalism, and I want to put things back into our profession. What I did was I partnered with an organization called Truth Sayers, who are using a cognitive dissonance model, that's a neuroscience basis, to identify questions. So it's a bit of a weird survey, because you actually have to sort of answer the question, given the answer that the survey tells you. So you get this question and it says, press yes. And if you hesitate a long time, it's basically saying there's a problem here. You don't want to answer yes. You don't really believe in this. And if you answer really quickly, it tends to be, yeah, okay, you're on board with this. So the questions are posed in different ways to get an answer about what do you really think is happening, which tends to come from evidence you've seen. We've got a checklist for this. We have a meeting for this. We've got a process for this. And then there's the feeling one, where you go, yeah, I don't really feel it's working, or we don't have much, but it's going really well. So you can actually see that across the board. And there's some interesting figures that come out where there's a difference between what we think is happening and what we feel is happening, or what we feel is happening is going really well, but what we think we're doing is not that great. So that adds a real level of interest to this survey.
I love it. It sounds amazing. I might have to fill it in myself.
Yes, do. I mean, what we ask people to do is doesn't matter what your job description, your role is, saying you're in this organization, you're involved in a major change, or you're helping to build the capability for change. Just think for a moment around you. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? And then answer it. And I also find that when you're answering those questions, you get inspiration about things that maybe actions you can take to improve the situation. Just because you've been asked something, it triggers things in the head. Yeah, well, I could do this better, or, I don't think we're doing that at all, and it really does help. So I think there are two benefits, the evidence-led data at the end, but actually the thoughts that are triggered when you're answering questions.
I wonder as well whether, going back to your earlier point about time and having time to reflect on change, even just taking that moment to complete the questionnaire, it's making you have a think about how things are. And I absolutely agree with you that is the bit that's missing in many organizations, is this kind of constant forward motion and no time to just stop and think, is this working? Is there a way we could do this differently? What didn't work in the past? What lessons can we learn from the past? It just never happens. It's like constant onward motion, and taking 5 minutes to think about your own practice is so valuable.
Well, I think actually the statistics from last year showed that we actually don't measure the value of our changes, which doesn't help when we're trying to convince people that we do something valuable. I ran a session yesterday, which was all about, let's say that I am doing a change, a cultural change, that's going to make people feel more confident about their skills. Confidence, how am I ever going to prove that? How am I going to measure that? And I show them techniques where we take the intangibles all the way through to tangible things we could notice and therefore we could measure. The reason I share those techniques, and that's what I train on, is because I'm thinking, well, if we don't turn it into tangible things that you could notice, you could measure, you could track, then we can't prove that we're actually being successful. So sometimes we can snatch defeat from the jaws of success because we have a success. People are working differently, but because it's not showing up purely in the bottom line, it's not there in the P&L, then it's discounted. I think that's very dangerous for all of us who are in change. We've got to get better at measuring what we do. And it's taken me 3 years of solid work in turning intangibles to tangibles to go, yeah, I've got some ideas now of things I can point out to people that we should be focusing on.
Interesting. And I absolutely agree with you. I think it's one of, change management is one of those things that intrinsically it makes sense that you do it. And for leaders, it makes sense to do it. But unless we're able to demonstrate how we add value, how we make things easier to be implemented, or however you want to measure it, it's really difficult if you have someone who's reluctant to engage in change, or even to engage having people to support change from a cultural or people perspective. We have to be able to show that we add value beyond just it seems like a nice to have. I don't think we can do that anymore. We're not in that space these days.
No, and I think that constantly saying, well, there are lots of tangible measures around project delivery, the on time, on budget, how many components pass their tests first time. There's an awful lot of practical, tangible measures you can make. We know that we're dealing with feelings. Do people feel ready to start working in the new way? Will your people want to use the system? Will they feel ready to use the system? Are they actually using the system? We will be able to measure if they've logged on to the system, but we won't be measuring unless we break down that a confidence measure effectively to seeing what they do. We won't actually see, yes, but have we shifted people onto this new platform? Are we able to maybe close off the licenses for the old platform? Can we archive the old data? Can we have a real decluttering and move onwards? I think that's the bit that we have to get in the forefront of, because that's actually the argument that is missing. And that's why I think senior leaders don't always value what we're talking about, because they can track that they've paid for something and it was delivered. The usage statistics, we're not giving them enough of it, if I'm honest.
What sort of things, when you're working with people on those sorts of projects, when you're trying to create tangibles out of intangibles, what sort of things do you encourage people, help people to think about and measure?
Well, I think that I get people to think about, well, do you feel more confident in how to do your job? Mm. And you say, well, what does confidence? Then you start to break things down. You go, well, okay, what does confidence mean? If you're confident, what would you notice about somebody? That person pipes up and asks questions. That person is very willing to listen to feedback because they're confident that if you give them feedback, they could probably do something with it. They might be coaching other people. Okay. All right. So that's given us 3 areas to further explore. Okay. Then, okay. So if they're coaching other people, what are we seeing that? Can we measure that? We can ask people, have you shared any new ideas? Have you shared any tips and techniques with your colleagues in the last week? You can start to sort of get measures about, but are you behaving differently? And it is incredibly difficult. I don't want to simplify an argument that's very hard, because I'm trying to measure, I'm trying to notice when people behave differently. And that means that they think differently, they've got a different attitude, and that leads to a different behavior. And that behavior might be that they actually finish a load of activities first thing in the morning, as opposed to having it drag on all through the day. How am I going to measure that? But I'm actually going to, maybe I could think about, well, this platform is supposed to make people feel more organized. It's supposed to help them get through their transactions more quickly. So can I look at questions around, is the end-to-end elapsed time of doing something shorter? That probably indicates a bit of confidence as well, because people can go from start to finish without interruption. So I think the kind of conversations we ought to have about how would we notice if we really have made a difference?
I think that's really interesting. And I think it is, I often talk about noticing things in my work, and how as a leader and a manager and as a change practitioner, we need to be noticing more things rather than just kind of drifting through the project or drifting through life. We got to notice what's different, what's changing. I think that idea of really thinking at the beginning, what are we looking for people to do differently, and then how will we know if they are doing that, is a really useful process, and probably one that isn't done in a lot of change programs. You're exactly right. The focus is on time, budget, and everything else, and less about the behavior that we're looking to be created by this thing that we're doing. And particularly on the technology implementation, it's all about go live date and when the technology is implemented, and less about, well, how is this going to impact on what people are going to be doing every day?
Well, I think it also, when we talk about, therefore, we recognise that change is about changing behaviours, which is changing attitudes. I think that leads us into a conversation about it's changing people's feelings. And I'm just doing a paper at the moment for another client, which is around impact assessment. And I said, feelings are impacts too. Because I get very frustrated when I see an impact assessment that starts with, we're going to change this platform. That means we're going to change our processes. That means we're going to change our data. And I get all of those structural impacts. But also what we're doing is, let's say we're going to streamline and automate part of a process. It's something I'm doing with a utility at the moment. So instead of guys walking around a big power station, collecting data on flow rates and temperatures and things, all of that's being monitored automatically now and fed into our systems. I want them to change their entire job. I want them to open a laptop, look at a screen of data and go, that piece of equipment needs to be maintained urgently. This piece of equipment needs to be replaced urgently. So they're putting in the engineering calls much quicker in the cycle, so we have less downtime. So I'm now asking them to be far more analytical, to take decisions. I've moved them away from data collection and input into data analysis and decision making. So that doesn't get captured, I think, when you look at, well, we have to change this system and this process and this piece of data. That doesn't capture the, I'm going to do something completely different. You're asking me to be a data analyst, but I thought I was somebody who was sort of, first line support on maintenance of equipment. And so we're changing their identity at work, and that might feel very exciting or very threatening. But we need to assess the impact of how big a leap in people's perception, their corporate profile that they have in their head of what they do and why they do it. Again, these are conversations that we're not having enough of. I'm heartbroken to report that I did actually have this conversation with a group of chief executives for a number of companies that were all doing the same finance system platform replacement. And I brought all these things up because one of the things that's really noticeable with the finance teams is that they are saying, right, actually, we're getting data in more from upstream from our colleagues and other systems than we are putting in for ourselves. So actually, what we need to be doing is probably coaching our colleagues upstream to get the data right. Because if it comes to us at this point, it's almost too late for us to do anything with it. So now we're becoming coaches and trainers, and we're trying to assess the quality of data rather than being responsible for creating it. Hang on a minute, I never signed up to be a trainer. Yeah. I didn't want to be a coach. And I was reporting all of this back to the chief executives, and you're getting it. I can see that by your face.
No.
They would say, oh, we'll worry about that later. We can see your point, but we don't think that's the important thing. Right now, what we've got to get is we've got to get all the APIs built into our finance system. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have, I am keeping on. I'm not giving up. But it's how do we put that kind of story across? When we're doing an impact assessment, it's feelings and it's how big a leap in almost my perception of myself are you asking me to take?
And I'm nodding along because when I did my PhD research, the whole thing of identity came out as a massive factor in change, which is really overlooked. this idea that you join the organization to do one thing and then you're asked to do another is I found just not considered, and people are just expected to just do this new thing. And it's something that I'd observed early on in my career. So I did a project donkeys years ago for a utilities company where they realized that their installers who were out and about putting things in people's houses were actually the face of the company. So they had the call center, they all had loads of customer service training, et cetera, et cetera. These guys had none, and they were just coming in but for most customers, unless something went wrong, these were the guys who represented the organization. And when we started doing the work, we said, you need to be investing more in these people so that they are able to represent your company in a way that you want them to. But they didn't see themselves that way. The organization didn't see them in that way as being customer service representatives. And it was a real battle to actually get them some training and some support and a nice uniform and all this sort of thing so that they could this company was spending millions of pounds on call center technology and nothing on the people who are out doing the installation. But it was a struggle for everybody to kind of see themselves in this new way. And some of the installers didn't want to do it. It wasn't what they'd signed up for. I've seen the same thing with stuff like a TUPE transfer, where people have gone from public sector to private sector or vice versa. And that element of it is not usually considered, and you have to fight quite hard to get it considered. But it's massively important, this idea of, I see myself as this person in the organization, and that shapes my sense of self. And now you're changing my identity, and that is uncomfortable for me, and you need to help me through that. Otherwise, I'm either not going to do it well, or I'll leave, and you lose that knowledge and experience.
I think you and I are on the same page, because I think that talk about cultural change, I would like to make a plea for a sort of category called identity change, because I think that by giving it a label, and I've written about this in one of my impact assessment papers, but I think by giving it a label, identity change, then I think it gets a bit more recognition and respect. Because I agree with you. I think with identity change, the simplest way to explain it is that we all have a certain pride about what we do. And you need to think about, how does somebody describe what they do to, I don't know, an elderly relative or at a party or something when somebody asks them, or on a date? And as you said, if you're TUPEing from public sector to private sector, I know people have felt uncomfortable because they think that they're now going into a sort of corporate money situation. Equally, I know people who felt very uncomfortable moving from a corporate world to a public sector world because they think that they'll be perceived as less than. So it's, how do people describe themselves and what they do? If you're messing with that, then you've got a significant behavior change, attitude change on your hands. And I think that too often we get caught up in cultural change as in the culture of the whole organization. I'm going, no, there's an individual change called identity change. And I don't think that we've captured that yet.
No, I agree. And I think so much of the change activity that is done in organizations is done at a group level. So it's done as this team or this bit of the organization, or even the whole organization, with the assumption that everyone's the same. And of course, it's just not true. And again, that came out in my own research, that you've got to take a bit more of an individualized approach to it based on how that change is going to affect that person or that team, because it will be different for everybody based on their own experience and their own like or dislike of dealing with new stuff. There's a whole load of different personality, behavioural experience, cultural, whatever, how they see themselves, all of that makes difference. So we need to do things far more targeted and far less, let's just sheep dip everyone and invite them to a town hall meeting and show them some slides, because it just doesn't work.
But I am a pragmatist, and I will say that I do totally get that people sort of group people together, this team, this department, this whatever. I think, however, I can still get identity change on the agenda, even with that attitude, because what I've been working on is really talking, the example I gave about the finance people is almost apocryphal, because if you're working in any aspect of artificial intelligence, what we are doing is we are absolutely replacing data input with automated data generation. So I work in generative AI. And it doesn't matter what your role is. If you had in any way, you were collecting information together, you were putting information in, probably your role has changed to evaluating the quality of that data and perhaps trying to improve the source of that data. Those are two key responsibilities now that replace the data input. So I can talk about how that makes you feel. It can make you feel threatened. It can make you feel proud. It can make you feel excited. It can make you feel cutting edge. It can make you feel obsolete. I can talk about that identity change as a sort of almost a generic across whatever transformation organizations are doing. And I'm finding that quite helpful because that gets people going, oh, yeah, we've got some of that. And they go, okay, well, let's drop it in for the impact assessment. Let's drop it down a level and see exactly what the leap is for each of the different roles that are being impacted. And that can be quite helpful, I think.
That's a really good idea, because I think the approach that I've taken in the past as well is to have that kind of team level based change led by the manager of that team or the leader of that group, so that, you know, we as change professionals, or me working on a change program, is coming up with content and approaches for dealing with the change, but then it's up to that person how they use them and the messages that they want to share and how they tailor the communications to fit what their team are interested in and where they're at. So I think you're right. You can't do like individualized change in a huge organization. It's just not possible. But you cascade it and you do it at different levels, because inevitably you do have to have the town hall meeting where the CEO tells everyone what's happening. It's expected and it's normal and it's what happens, but it's then what happens next, isn't it? How is that tailored? How is that used? How is that dealt with by the different leaders and different people in the organization?
I think you highlight something really interesting about our role in change. There you are talking about how you produce the content and the approach that then managers who are at the front line of change are using with their teams. I think we are on the cusp of a real seismic change to that, because my experience of organizations who are really getting change right is that they are constantly asking me to build the capability in those managers. In other words, that they are shifting my role from producing a lot of the sort of the content and approach to I'm upskilling those managers. I am teaching them techniques where they are the ones that can work out what to communicate, what to hold back on right now. They are the ones that I'm developing techniques for. How do you build the resilience for yourself and for your team members to keep going when there's so much change around? How do you learn techniques for getting people to actually go, oh, okay, I'll give it a go? So this is a conversation that the group I lead called the Continuous Change Community. It is a LinkedIn group. It's about to go through its name change. We've been going for 3 years. We've got several thousand members. We hold monthly networking events, and we're actually going to becoming the change capability community, because we feel that actually what we do more of is capability. And every year we've had a session where we've talked about what is our role as change professionals. And post-COVID, there's very much this view that there's so much change. We as professionals can't manage each individual change. We just can't do it. We are actually at the forefront of upskilling managers to do change to themselves and their teams. And so less of giving them information and pre-prepared presentations and templates for filling in, and much more about teaching them how to do change without all the jargon, without the qualifications, but certainly at a very practical level. How can they feel, yeah, I can do this. We're changing all the time. I know what I'm doing. Really giving them techniques, giving them solutions for how to do stuff.
Hurrah for that, I say, because that's where we need to get to. I'm hearing similar things myself, is that it's, we need to be creating the capacity and the capability on the ground, because there's only so many of us, and we can't do everything. And actually, that's what managers and leaders need to be doing, is doing this thing for themselves so that they can deal with it on an ongoing basis. What are the key capabilities then, I suppose, circling back to your questionnaire, what are the key capabilities that you see as being most important for leaders, managers to be developing to become able to deal with this level of change that they're currently facing?
I think I'm going to answer that question in two parts. I think for change professionals, there are certain capabilities that we really need. And I think there are capabilities on the ground that managers need. As a change professional, I think that we've talked about being able to really encourage people to paint quite a detailed future picture. And being able to communicate that out, very important. And portfolio management as a technique, not that we're responsible for the whole portfolio, but being able to pull all of the different changes together and create almost a cohesive picture of how they all fit together, fill the jigsaw puzzle. I think as change professionals, that is absolutely what we have to deliver. At the management level, what we have to give them is techniques for actually, how do you make change happen? You make change happen because how are you communicating the information really clearly? You know, this is going to change, but this isn't going to change. So giving them techniques for how they convey information, how they enable staff to vent their anger, but also how they then address that, how they widen out the opportunities for their team members to be able to volunteer to participate without falling into the trap of telling them, you do that, you do that. So much more of that volunteerism. Real techniques, therefore, on not just on the participation, but also the how do we cope with that feeling of I'm losing my motivation because I'm getting confused, I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired. So there's something in there around techniques for how we actually build resilience. A lot of those techniques, I will say, I draw from the School of Positive Psychology and from neuroscience. But I don't tell people necessarily that that's where they're coming from, because they just want a simple, intuitive thing they can do. They don't need all the theories and models about change. They are not change professionals. They are finance experts. They're experts in the distribution of fast-moving consumer goods, you know, out to wholesalers. You know, that's where their expertise lies, and that's where their pride lies. All I'm doing is giving them techniques that help them do it better.
I'm really excited to hear actually about what the survey shows this year, because do you think it will be different to last year? Because clearly, you know, the world has moved on yet again, hasn't it, in the last 12 months?
I think that from everything that I'm sensing, I wonder if the statistics on we can't manage the volume of change we've got are going to be even worse than they were last year, to be fair. I'm not hopeful, but I would like to be hopeful that we are getting slightly better at managing or measuring the benefits of what we're achieving, at least tracking our progress. But I don't think we are. But by keep asking the question, I hope eventually that message is going to last. But one of the things that came out from last year's report, which led me to say that actually we're coming across as quite a young and naive profession, is that some of the really simple things, like we don't celebrate our successes, and we don't support people who lose their way during change. You know, people who are struggling to change get left behind. Those were two things that were starkly shown in the statistics last year as being less than 20% each, that we're not celebrating, we're not supporting. And I hope that those very quick wins that we could improve, let's hope that those are higher this year.
I do hope so. I still think a lot of change professionals have a view of people who are left behind or resistance to change, which isn't actually that helpful. My own thinking has changed a lot over the years, as I'm sure yours has too, from resistance being annoying to actually super engagement. You know, someone's bothered enough to resist your change, you should start paying attention to what they're saying. But I'm not sure all change professionals are quite in that space yet.
And we're human beings. When somebody's resisting what we're asking, it depends how we're feeling ourselves about how we greet that news. Sometimes we greet it as super engagement, and this is an opportunity for a fantastically productive conversation. I'm actually doing a video with somebody who is a change professional who's really, really good at dealing with that super engagement. I'm going to share that on my website because I was so excited by her stories of success. But other days, perhaps when I haven't had a bar of chocolate, I see it as resistance. And I'm gnashing my teeth because I think I haven't got time for this. So I think we have to recognize that, we are not super beings. We are human. But hopefully, the more that we upskill managers themselves with the techniques to have these difficult conversations, perhaps we're building a sort of a much greater capacity for people to help each other manage through change.
Absolutely. Well, it would be great to have you back on to talk about the survey results once they're ready, if you'd be willing. I think that would be really interesting to find out more about how it goes this year.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So how can people find out more about you and about the survey? We'll put a link in the show notes for the survey, but where should they go and have a look to find out more about you and your work?
My website is agilechangemanagement.co.uk, and you've just put /newsletter. Sign up for that. Every 3 weeks, I actually produce new content. I must be mad. But I do produce new content, and you can find me in LinkedIn as well. I'm very, very well known in LinkedIn. I've got tens of thousands of, I'm up to almost my limit of connections now. Wow. So you can follow me on LinkedIn and you'll see the things that I'm producing. But I do produce unique new content regularly. And the reason is that it is my way of capturing my lessons learned. And of course, if you're going to be applying for the Change Awards, then you'll see me in April at the big Change Awards event, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, and you might see me there too if I'm able to come along. It would be great to go again. I loved it last time.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been a real joy to talk to you. The time has absolutely flown by, so I hope we get the chance to do it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.